She was 18 and homeless in the high mountain country, cast out with nothing but a gray woolen blanket and $12 folded into a worn leather purse. She had no family left to turn to, no plan to follow, and just one small object that held any meaning, a smooth, pocket-worn whetstone that had belonged to her grandfather. And with those $12, she walked away from the only life she had known, heading toward the snowbound passes outside the frontier town of Pinewood. But what nobody knew, least of all her, was that a loose stone in the hearth of a forgotten cabin, buried in the drifts, held a secret that would not only save her life, but build her a new one from the ground up. Settle in close now, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from tonight, as we tell the story of Mary Holt. Mary's world had once been contained in the scent of pine shavings and the steady, rhythmic rasp of a hand plane on seasoned oak. Her grandfather, Thomas Holt, was a carpenter, a man whose quiet presence was as solid and dependable as the timber he worked. He had raised her for the first 10 years of her life, after her father was lost in a logging accident, and his workshop was her sanctuary. Thomas taught her the language of wood, how to read the grain, how to feel the readiness of a joint, how to listen for the clean bite of a sharp blade. He gave her the whetstone when she was 8, a small, two-sided rectangle of novaculite, one side for coarse shaping, and the other for honing a fine edge. "A sharp tool is a safe tool, Mary," he'd said, his voice a low rumble. "And a person who can keep their tools sharp can make their own way. Remember that." He taught her how to hold a knife against the stone, at the perfect angle, drawing the blade back in a smooth, consistent arc, again and again, until it could shave a curl from a thumbnail. That stone, and the skill it represented, was his legacy to her. When he passed from lung fever in her 10th year, her mother, gentle and worn thin by grief, remarried a man named Elias Vance, a merchant from town, with soft hands and a ledger for a heart. The workshop was sold, its tools scattered, and the scent of sawdust was replaced by the cloying smell of mothballs and stored woolens. Her mother faded slowly over the next 8 years, a candle dwindling in a drafty room, and when she was finally gone, Mary was left alone with a man who saw her not as a daughter, but as an entry on the wrong side of a balance sheet. Elias Vance was a man who valued order and utility above all else. In his world, things and people had a clear purpose and a quantifiable worth. Mary, in his estimation, had neither. She was quiet, competent, and possessed a self-sufficiency that he found unnerving. She could mend a fence, split firewood with a clean and efficient swing, and cook a nourishing meal from sparse ingredients, skills learned at her grandfather's side. But Elias saw these not as virtues, but as remnants of a past he wished to erase. After her mother's funeral, a silence settled over the house, thick and cold as winter frost. Mary continued her chores, moving through the rooms like a ghost, while Elias made his calculations. He did not yell or threaten. His cruelty was the quiet, administrative kind, delivered with the impersonal finality of a banker foreclosing on a loan. The end came on a Tuesday morning, 2 months after the ground had frozen over her mother's grave. He called her into the parlor, the room kept for visitors and bad news, and gestured to a chair she had never been invited to sit in before. He did not sit himself, but stood by the cold fireplace, a small, sealed envelope in his hand. "Mary," he began, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, "you are 18 years of age now, a woman grown. Your mother and I provided for you as was our duty, but that duty is now concluded." He placed the envelope on the polished mantelpiece. "There are $12 in there. It is more than fair. I expect you to be packed and gone by noon. The stagecoach passes through Pinewood this afternoon. It would be a sensible way to travel." He didn't ask where she would go. He didn't offer a word of comfort or concern. It was a transaction. She was a line item being cleared from his accounts. Mary looked at his face, at the impassive set of his jaw, and saw nothing of the man her mother had loved, only the cold arithmetic of his decision. She did not cry or plead. An argument would be as useless as arguing with the winter wind. She simply nodded, stood, and walked from the room without taking the envelope. She went to her small attic bedroom and gathered her few belongings, her mother's woolen blanket, a change of clothes, and from a small wooden box, her grandfather's whetstone. She wrapped the stone in a scrap of flannel and tucked it deep in her pocket. On her way out the door, she took the envelope from the mantel, not for the money, but because to leave it would be to grant him a final, small victory. She closed the door behind her, the latch clicking shut, with a sound of utter finality, and did not look back. The road from her stepfather's house to the town of Pinewood was 5 miles long, and with each step, the cold seeped deeper into her bones. The sky was the color of lead, heavy and pregnant with snow that had not yet begun to fall. The wind cut through her thin coat, and she wrapped the gray blanket tighter around her shoulders, a meager shield against the vast, indifferent landscape. Pinewood was a small cluster of log buildings huddled in a narrow valley, a place where trappers, miners, and loggers came for supplies and whiskey. Mary walked its single muddy street, the $12 in her purse feeling both impossibly small and enormously heavy. She asked for work at the general store, at the saloon, at the livery stable, but the answer was always the same. Winter was a time for hunkering down, not for hiring on new hands, especially not a young woman alone with no references. By late afternoon, a bone-deep weariness had settled over her, and the first flakes of snow began to drift from the sky, spiraling down with a lazy, deceptive grace. She knew she couldn't stay in town. A room at the boarding house would cost $1 a night, and her money would be gone in less than 2 weeks. She had heard talk of another settlement, Greenwater, a day's walk over the next pass. Perhaps there would be work there. It was a desperate gamble, but it was the only one she had. She bought a small loaf of bread and a piece of hard cheese, with a few of her coins, and started walking west, out of town and into the rising mountains. The snow fell faster now, no longer lazy flakes, but a thick, driving curtain of white that blurred the edges of the world. The track grew faint, then disappeared entirely. The wind howled through the pines, a low, mournful sound that seemed to pull the warmth from her body. She was no longer walking toward Greenwater. She was simply walking to stay alive, putting one foot in front of the other, her world shrinking to the next step, the next breath, the burning in her lungs. The sun set without her noticing, the gray light simply fading to a deeper, more profound darkness, and the cold became a living thing, a predator, stalking her through the swirling snow. She stumbled through the blizzard for hours, lost and freezing, her body numb and her mind beginning to drift. It was by sheer chance that she saw it, a dark shape against the white, a subtle anomaly in the landscape of snow-laden pines and buried rock. At first, she thought it was just a large boulder, but as she drew closer, fighting her way through waist-deep drifts, she saw the unmistakable straight line of a roof peak and the dark, square void of a window shutter hanging askew. Jutting from the snow at one end was the top of a fieldstone chimney, a thin plume of displaced snow trickling from its cap. It was a cabin, a small, forgotten trapper's shack half swallowed by the mountain. Hope, sharp and painful, pierced through her exhaustion. She floundered toward it, her hands raw and frozen, as she clawed away the snow from the low door. It was wedged tight, frozen solid in its frame. Panic began to rise, a hot, frantic counterpoint to the encroaching cold. She circled the small structure, her legs heavy as lead, and found the broken shutter. The window opening was small, but it was enough. Using the last of her strength, she hauled herself up and over the sill, tumbling onto a dusty planked floor in a cascade of snow. Inside, the darkness was absolute, but it was a different kind of darkness than the storm outside. It was still, silent, and blessedly free of the wind's relentless scream. She lay on the floor for a long moment, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. Slowly, cautiously, she got to her feet and felt her way through the small space. It was a single room, no more than 12 feet square. Her outstretched hands found the rough bark of log walls, the splintered surface of a crude table, and then the cold, gritty texture of stone. A fireplace. It was small, but it was a promise of warmth, a chance at survival. The cabin was a wreck, a derelict shell abandoned to the elements. But in that moment, it was the most beautiful place she had ever seen. It was shelter. It was a chance to see the morning. The first order of business was fire. Mary felt her way to the hearth, her frozen fingers exploring the stone. It was choked with old ash and debris. She cleared it as best she could, then turned her attention to fuel. The cabin offered little. A three-legged stool, a broken chair, and the crude bunk frame against the far wall. With a surge of desperate energy, she broke the stool apart, its dry legs snapping with a sharp crack that echoed in the profound silence. She used the slivers of wood as kindling, piling them carefully in the hearth. She had no matches, but her grandfather had taught her how to make fire with flint and steel, a skill she had thought a quaint relic of an older time. Now, it was the only thing that stood between her and freezing to death. She had no flint, but she searched the hearthstones, her fingers finding a piece of quartz, hard and sharp-edged. From her small bag, she took her knife and the small steel striker that was part of her grandfather's old kit. She struck the steel against the quartz, again and again, sending a pathetic shower of sparks into the tinder. They died instantly. She tried again, shielding the kindling with her body, her hands trembling with cold and exertion. Finally, a single spark caught on a piece of dry punk wood she'd found, glowing a faint, miraculous red. She blew on it gently, coaxing it, nursing it, until a tiny flame flickered to life. She fed it splinters. Then larger pieces of the stool, and at last, a leg from the broken bunk. The fire caught, and a weak, smoky light filled the cabin, pushing back the oppressive darkness. The warmth was a physical shock, a painful tingling in her hands and feet, as blood returned to her frozen extremities. As the fire grew stronger, she saw the state of the hearth more clearly. The stones were loose, the mortar crumbled. One large, flat stone at the base rocked precariously when she nudged it with her boot. It was a hazard. A shifting stone could collapse the fire onto the wooden floor. She had to fix it. Using a piece of the broken chair as a lever, she pried at the loose hearthstone, intending to reseat it more firmly in the dirt floor. It lifted with surprising ease, and beneath it was not dirt, but a dark, rectangular void. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She reached down, her fingers brushing against the cold, smooth surface of a metal box. With trembling hands, she lifted the box from its hiding place. It was heavy, made of tin, its surface filmed with the damp and dust of years. A simple latch held it shut. She worked it open with the tip of her knife, and the lid creaked back to reveal the contents. On top lay a small, oilskin-wrapped bundle. She unfolded it carefully. Inside was a stack of 20 gold coins, each one bearing the profile of an eagle, their weight solid and real in her palm. It was a fortune, more money than she had ever seen in her life. Beneath the coins was a hunting knife, its blade still coated in a thin layer of protective grease. The handle was made of polished antler, and it fit her hand as if it were made for her. It was a beautiful, practical tool, a treasure in its own right. And at the very bottom of the box, folded into a neat square, was a letter. The paper was yellowed and brittle at the creases, but the ink was dark and clear, written in a steady, careful hand. She moved closer to the fire, the flickering light dancing on the page, as she began to read. "To whoever finds this place," it began. "My name is Silas Croft. I built this cabin in the year 1848, and I have lived here for 32 years. I was a trapper and a hunter. This mountain has been my home, and it has been a good one to me. I am an old man now, and my time is short. I have no kin left to speak of. My wife, Eleanor, passed from fever 20 years ago, and our daughter, Rose, followed her a year later. She was only 7. These coins were for her. I saved them over the years, a piece of every season's earnings, so that she might have a start in life, a small piece of security in a hard world. It is a father's wish to provide for his child. Since she is gone, the money has had no purpose. I cannot take it with me, and I will not have it fall into the hands of bankers in town. So I leave it here, in the heart of the home I built, for the next soul who needs this roof more than the wind does. Use it to make a start. The knife was one I made for my Rose, for when she was old enough to learn the ways of the woods. It is a good blade. Keep it sharp. I hope this cabin gives you shelter, and I hope this money gives you a choice. That is all a person can ask for. May your fire burn bright. Mary read the letter 3 times, the simple, heartfelt words of a man she would never know, echoing in the quiet cabin. She looked around the small, derelict room, at the rough-hewn logs and the stone fireplace, and saw it not as a wreck, but as a legacy. A home built by a father's hands, a shelter left with a stranger's blessing. She carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the box, alongside the knife and the gold. The fire crackled, casting long shadows on the walls. Outside, the blizzard still raged, but inside, a profound sense of peace had settled over her. She was no longer just a survivor, fighting for one more day. She was an heir. Silas Croft's words had given her more than money. They had given her a purpose. She would not just survive in this cabin. She would honor his memory. She would rebuild it. She would make it a home again. That night, wrapped in her mother's blanket by the warmth of the fire, with her grandfather's whetstone in her pocket and a stranger's legacy at her feet, Mary Holt slept a deep and dreamless sleep, for the first time since her mother had died. The storm howled, but it could not touch her. She was safe. When the storm broke 2 days later, the world was transformed. The sky was a brilliant, aching blue, and the snow lay in deep, sculptural drifts, glittering under the sun. Mary left the cabin, her path now clear. She took 2 of the gold coins with her, leaving the rest hidden safely beneath the hearthstone. The walk back to Pinewood was slow but steady. She knew her purpose now, and every step was firm. In town, the gold coin caused a stir at the general store, but the owner, a woman named Martha Gable, a stern-faced widow with kind eyes, simply nodded and accepted it. Mary did not buy frivolities. She bought tools and supplies with the careful consideration of a master craftsman. A new axe head and a sturdy hickory handle, a crosscut saw, a froe for splitting shingles, a sack of nails, a small keg of black powder for clearing stumps, and a bag of precious window glass, carefully wrapped in canvas. She bought food that would last: 2 50-pound sacks of flour, dried beans, salt pork, coffee, and a large brick of salt. She also bought a rifle, a simple, reliable Henry, and a box of cartridges. The mountain was a provider, but it was also dangerous. The load was too much to carry, so she paid a young man at the livery stable $2 to haul it for her on a pack mule. Following her back to the cabin, he looked at her with a mixture of pity and disbelief. A young woman heading alone into the wilderness. But he took the money and asked no questions. For the next month, Mary worked from dawn until dusk, her days defined by the satisfying rhythm of labor. She learned the language of the cabin, its strengths and weaknesses. She started with the roof, using the froe and a mallet to split cedar shakes from a fallen giant down the creek, just as her grandfather had taught her to split oak. She laid them in overlapping courses, the fresh-cut wood smelling sharp and clean in the cold air. She chinked the gaps between the logs with a mixture of clay from the creek bed and dried moss, sealing the cabin against the wind. She spent a week rebuilding the top of the chimney, resetting the stones with fresh mortar, ensuring a safe and steady draw for the smoke. Her hands, once soft, grew calloused and strong. Her body ached at the end of each day, but it was a good ache, the feeling of work well done. She was not just repairing a structure. She was building a life, one nail, one log, one carefully placed stone at a time. Her solitude was first broken by the arrival of Elias Vance, not her stepfather, but a different man with the same name, a traveling fur trader who worked the high country. He was a lanky, weathered man in his 40s, with a quiet demeanor, and he found her cabin by following the new wisp of smoke rising from its chimney. He expected to find an old trapper, not a young woman alone. He stood at her doorway, his string of pack mules behind him, and simply stared for a long moment. "Well, I'll be," he murmured. his eyes taking in the neat stacks of firewood, the newly repaired roof, and the clean-swept yard. Mary, wary at first, offered him a cup of hot coffee. He accepted, and as they sat on the small porch she had built, he told her his name was Elias, and she felt a strange shiver at the coincidence. But this Elias was different. He saw her not as a burden but as a marvel. He asked about her work, and she showed him the traps she had begun to set, simple deadfalls and snares she'd learned to make as a girl. He examined her handiwork, nodding in approval. "You have a good hand for it," he said. Before he left, he offered to trade her furs for anything she needed from the larger towns down below. It was the beginning of a friendship built on mutual respect and fair trade. Her next visitor was Martha Gable, the store owner from Pinewood. She arrived in a sturdy buckboard wagon, having heard about the mountain girl from Elias Vance on his last trip through town. Martha, a woman who had clawed her own way to independence after her husband's death, felt a kinship with Mary. She brought a gift, a small cast-iron wood stove. "A fireplace is good for heat, but a stove is for living," she said, directing two men to unload it. "It'll hold a fire through the night and give you an even heat for baking." It was an act of profound generosity, a recognition from one self-reliant woman to another. The final piece of her new community was Jedediah Stone, a retired carpenter who lived on a small claim a few miles down the valley. He came by one afternoon, drawn by curiosity. He was an old man, with hands gnarled by a lifetime of woodworking. He watched her struggle to set the pane of glass she'd bought into a new window frame she'd built. Without a word, he took the tools from her, and with a few deft movements, showed her how to properly glaze the pane with putty, creating a perfect, weatherproof seal. "You have your grandfather's eye," he said, his voice raspy with age. "But you need to learn the finish work." He came back every few days after that, teaching her the finer points of carpentry, sharing the quiet wisdom of his craft. Through these three people, Mary was no longer alone. She was a part of the valley, a neighbor, a presence acknowledged and respected. Her home, once a forgotten ruin, was becoming a landmark, a testament to her resilience. A year passed. The fierce mountain winter gave way to a green spring, a warm summer, and a crisp, golden autumn. The cycle turned again, and the snows returned. But this time, Mary watched them fall not with fear, but with a sense of quiet contentment. The cabin was no longer a shelter. It was a home. The iron stove Martha had given her radiated a steady, comforting warmth, and the smell of baking bread often filled the small room. The window Jedediah had helped her set framed a perfect view of the snow-covered pines, its glass clear and free of frost. On the small, hand-planed mantel above the fireplace, two objects sat side by side. One was the smooth, gray whetstone her grandfather had given her, its surface worn into a gentle saddle by years of his hands and hers. The other was the antler-handled hunting knife left by Silas Croft. The two objects, one from the man who had taught her how to make her way, and one from the man who had given her a place to make it, seemed to belong together. They were talismans of her past and her present, symbols of the love of two strangers, a carpenter and a trapper, who had provided for her across the years. She had become a part of the mountain's rhythm. She knew the paths of the deer, the calls of the winter birds, the best places to find dry wood. Elias Vance, the trader, was a regular visitor, bringing news and supplies, and taking her carefully prepared furs to market. Martha Gable sent up parcels of books, and sometimes a jar of preserves. Jedediah had helped her build a small, sturdy barn for the two goats she'd acquired. People in Pinewood no longer spoke of the mountain girl with pity, but with a kind of grudging admiration. They called her by her name, Mary Holt. She was the woman who had tamed a piece of the wilderness, who had built a life from nothing. Mary Holt was 18 and homeless when she walked into the mountains with $12 to her name. She spent it on bread and cheese and the foolish hope of finding work over the pass. But the life she found began not with what she bought, but with what she found, what she salvaged, and what she built with her own two hands. She had taken a forgotten, derelict cabin and made it a warm, solid home. She had taken a stranger's legacy and honored it with hard work and gratitude. She had taken her grandfather's lessons and used them to shape a future for herself, one that was sturdy and true and entirely her own. As she sat by the fire, the light glinting off the blade of Silas's knife and the worn surface of Thomas's whetstone, she felt the deep, quiet satisfaction of belonging. She had come to the mountain with nothing, a ghost haunted by loss, but the mountain, and the ghosts who resided there, had given her everything. It was the best $12 she had ever spent. We build our lives out of the materials we are given, but also from the things we find along the way. The unexpected shelters, the kindness of strangers, the legacies left in forgotten places. Mary's story is a testament to the power of seeing value where others see only decay. What forgotten cabin or overlooked opportunity in your own life might just be waiting for a little care to be turned into a home? Thank you for joining us tonight. Share this story with someone who appreciates the quiet strength of the human spirit, and we'll see you again next time.